Hello and welcome to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are well. I hope you've had a good week. This is a fun episode. We're going to talk about something different that I don't really talk about a lot. And if this is your first episode, go and have a scroll through the other catalogue of episodes because there's many things we talk about if you find this one interesting. So we're going to talk today about should you go for funding/investment in your business? Do you need it? I just want to talk about this, more so to direct people to this when I'm chatting with people who are considering this, then it's kind of a resource for them to go and refer back to, and then it's more so just a benefit that we can publish this and other people can access it and benefit from it, for anyone to consume. Something I want to touch on with this, and kind of as a disclaimer at the start of this, I am not a financial advisor. I am not telling you what to do for your specific business. I am not an accountant. So this is not me, giving you advice or telling you that you must do this or you should do this. I am just going to share with you some thoughts, some learnings, some observations, some things that I find in my work and my opinion on it, because I get asked a lot on my opinion. But please understand that that is just my opinion. If you are considering this, please go and speak to an expert. Please go and speak to an advisor. Please go and speak to someone who is qualified and is able to give you, real strong advice on this topic. However, apart from that, just as that disclaimer is over, I am going to give you my opinion. I am kind of going to share with you and tell you some bits and pieces that I think and have seen work well. And what else was I going to say? Hopefully this will be a short episode, but I think this might be interesting because, should you bootstrap, should you not? Whole conversation. Right, so just to be clear, when I talk about funding and investment, I mean somewhat similar but different things. So for me, when I'm talking about funding versus investment, I mean funding-wise, finding alternative non-equity sources for getting cash in your business. So whether that's through a grant, through a loan, whether that's a business loan or personal loan, like from some kind of initiative, like some way of getting cash that isn't equity based. Then obviously when I personally talk about investment, I mean someone coming to invest in your business who is an investor, who is part of your, you've got to report to them and is taking equity out of your business. Those are two distinctions that's really important to understand and to look into. And if you're not familiar, then definitely take some time and go and research and learn about the two separate things, because that's really important. But here's just my kind of take on this per se of what I think. So ultimately, here's my thing. If you can afford to not get investment and not get funding, I think it's good. I think bootstrap. I think if you can do it, bootstrapping is a really fantastic way. There's huge benefits. There is amazing things that comes from you being really resilient and being scrappy and having to build something from the ground up and really understand cash flow and really get into the nitty gritty of optimizing every pound and penny in your business and really seeing that, right? When people get a lot of money and you have a lot of investment, a lot of the skill set completely disappears because that's not on the agenda, right? Some business models are going to require investment, full stop. Some of them you just can't execute without it, right? So you might be in that camp. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people, especially in the day and age of social media and of, minimum viable products and MVPs to the, you can create pretty much anything now from nothing or very, very cheaply. And so you can often bootstrap a lot of businesses. But there are some businesses where you could get investment or you could go and seek funding. And then there's a lot of what ifs. And I think this is why you're listening to this episode, because a lot of people have this kind of, oh, well, we could get this and I could get this much money, or the bank will give us this much and that would mean we could do this. So maybe we should do that. And there's a real conversation there, right? And again, I think that's really interesting. I think it's good. I think it's important to know your options and to kind of see what is available to you and what is out there. But it's also important to remember, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What is the longer term thing? So for some people I talk to, so let's just preface this by saying most of the businesses I work with are bootstrapped. They started from the ground up and they've bootstrapped pretty much all the way. They might have received a tiny bit of funding via a grant or, a startup grant, or they might have put money of their own. They might have put some personal savings into the business, which is highly likely. Like most of the people, you've put some savings in, you've bought some kind of course, or you've bought some kind of education piece, or you've bought some software. Like most people have put their own money in, or they've used it to fund to get a coach so that they know what to actually get the business off the ground in the first place. Most people have done that, but most people I work with do not have investment. They have no equity stakeholders. They are very much bootstrapped. But they reach a point in their business where, in terms of scaling and their scaling goals, it makes sense that they need cash. And it makes sense that they need a certain amount of cash in order to do the thing they want to do in the most efficient way possible and to give the highest return. And the question we then end up having is around, what sort of funding do you go for? Do you go for investment? What investment do you get? What type of investment do you want? Who do you want as an investor? And we have those conversations. And that is really interesting, yeah, because you can reach, depending on your business, will dictate different things. And I'm talking less so about online business here, right? So if you have an online business, there's not a huge amount of reasons why you need investment. Again, I don't want to generalize, but for most of people, you won't, right? There might be the odd person that does. But for those of you who have businesses that are not predominantly online and that are service-based or product-based, some people get to the sort of, I would say it's the $500,000 mark to kind of 1.5 mil mark, where sometimes there's a question that comes up around, right, if we keep going on the scale and trajectory we're on, we need X, Y, and Z thing, or we need this thing or that thing. And so it's then where we're going to find the cash from. And then the cash discussion comes into, right, well, by this point, they often need to take some money out for themselves to live off. And then there's this whole discussion around, right, well, what is the profit left? And it's not been enough. For the people in that position, what tends to be and again, this is my opinion, it's dependent on the business, but as an overall trend I see, for most people, it doesn't make sense to go and get investment, traditional investment where you're giving away equity. And it's just a blanket statement here. Please, can you make it? I just want to make this clear. I am not a fan of giving equity away, because once you give equity away in a business, it is one ball game to play, and it is challenging. And there's a lot of things that you are held accountable for, and there's a lot of things that you can't just go and make a decision. I mean, it depends on the type of investor you get, but you can't just go and slapdash change your whole business and pivot to something else, right? So for most people, giving away equity is the worst thing possible. And if you are considering giving equity away, please, please, please think very, very carefully about it. And if you have to give some of it away, give as little away as possible. Please do not use programs like Dragon's Den or anything like Shark Tank as a representative or as a business blueprint of how much equity you should take away, because some of the people on those programs give away so much equity or they give away very little. It can go both ways, but those programs are not a reason to be I'm just going to pick this number out of thin air, or someone's offered to invest this much in my business and they want this much equity, and you shouldn't be oh, well, that sounds really low, so that's great. You have to really understand the power of 1%. 1% equity and what that means in a business. Go and look at what it would mean if you had 1% equity share in Apple or another business that you admire. It is a huge, huge thing to give away just 1% of your business. And what people don't understand is what that means longer term and how challenging it can be to buy people out at the point in which you do want to. Now, as I mentioned before, some people, you've got to get investment because there isn't really any other way of doing it, or you don't come from, there's various funding options not available to you. And so investment is the way forward. But a lot of people, you don't need investment, and there's other funding sources you can look at that make a hell of a lot more sense than you giving equity away. Some people might want an investor, yeah? So some of you might be considering it because you're actually, I want it. I want it for, most of the reason people go on Dragon's Den nowadays. It's for the contacts, it's for the network. It's not really for their money half the time. It's just they want to kind of connect up, yeah? So when you think about that, okay, cool, that's totally viable and doable, but you have to be so careful with who you want to mentor you or who you want access to whose contacts, and are they going to be involved in the business or not? Most investors don't want to be in your business. They're just giving you money and they want some kind of return. Obviously, some people are investing in your business and they don't really mind. And I'm not going to start breaking up all the different types of investors there are. You can go. I don't want to start speaking on stuff that is not my core zone of genius, because there's many amazing podcasts that will explain in real detail like which type of investors to look for. But what I'm essentially saying is not everybody is going to be there on the phone. Some of them will not even contact you. Depends on your culture, depends what you decide. But it's just important to remember that it isn't this like golden ticket. So many people feel like, right, if I got investment, then, I'm just the business will soar, the business will fly. It's like, yeah, that's not how it works. It's like, sadly, it doesn't work like that, right? So many businesses receive investment and it's the worst thing ever for them. And I think we hear about the stories of it going really well because that's newsworthy, right? But a lot of the stuff that goes on that you don't know about potentially is like stuff that you hadn't really thought about. And you're like, oh, right, okay, I see that wasn't as fun as it looks on the outside. So being really careful with your equity and how much you give away is really important. And I would say try really hard to not give any away. But that's coming from me, who's a very I am very much in the seat of like the business owner, of like being scrappy and having full creative control. That's where this comes from, right? So for some of you, you won't care. You might be like, well, I don't care. Like, I'll happily give 5% away or 10% or 20% or 30%. That's fine. If that's cool for you, that's good. I'm just sharing my kind of thought process on it. What I please would urge you to remember, and I know this sounds so obvious, but when you're in it and you're kind of in the numbers and processing it, sometimes you forget about this. You must understand the concept of majority equity share and of the fact of how much of the business are you holding on to and do you own. So what can happen sometimes is I hear people say, right, well, so-and-so wants to put X amount in, and so they want 5%. I'm like, right. And then she's like, so-and-so wants to put 20 grand in and they want X percent. You're like, right. And then so-and-so wants to put 100 grand in and it's X percent. I'm like, okay, what percentage are we up to? And very quickly, you can start layering investors and you end up with a massive chunk of equity out of the business. And then you can be at a point where you're creeping closer to you only owning 50% of the business. Now, obviously, 50% of the business is half, and, most people are going to want to have a majority equity share. Those are the things to think about and to be really mindful of, and to think, okay, well, what makes sense for me longer term? And this big question about should you go from fund and investment all comes back to, what is the outcome of the business? What is the long-term growth plan? What do you want to do? Do you want to sell and exit someday? Do you want this business to be with you for the next 10, 20 years? Is this a business that only has a lifespan of 5 years? Is it that you want to kind of pair up with someone and you want the business to be merged, be a merger? Do you want to kind of either you buy another business to add on to it and tack it on the end of, or they likewise with you? You've got to understand that. And most people won't, because it's hard to know at the beginning. Some of you will have very clear plans for what you want to do. And so really think about, okay, yeah, is this a lifestyle business? And when I say lifestyle business, that is not a negative thing. We hear the term lifestyle business as if like, oh, you've got a lifestyle business, as if it's like not a really important thing or it can't be very big. That is bullshit, right? Having a lifestyle business is going to be, I argue, in the next 10 years, 20 years, the thing to have. I think so many people will have a full-time job or a part-time job and make very good money in their job and also have something on the side, which we're seeing now to some degree, but it's going to get bigger. People are going to grow bigger businesses on the side and be making another 7 figures or multi-6 figures on the side whilst having a job that is like another thing. So this is like, what I don't want you to see a lifestyle business as a bad thing, because it's often branded as a bad thing. It's not. Something that is a lifestyle business can be so freeing and so fun. And what the problem some people do is they take a really successful kind of works really well lifestyle business, chuck investment into it, add investment into it. Sometimes it's not even very much. It could be a small amount. And then all of a sudden it just kind of transpires into something that is so far from what you originally started with and what you wanted it to be that it really doesn't feel in alignment. I'm not saying that that is the case for everyone, but I'm just saying you have to be really careful and you've got to really understand, what do you want from this long term? If you want to sell it one day, then yeah, there's total reasons why you'd want investment and why you'd want certain things. If your plan is not to sell, I'm not saying then therefore you shouldn't have investment, but you've got to have a real like kind of to and fro with that. What I tend to go with for a lot of people, if you're at the kind of 500,000 to a couple of £1 million in revenue a year mark, is I often suggest that you go and you essentially exhaust all possible other options that fit for you in the business until you decide to go for investment in terms of equity, in terms of, going and pitching and doing a fundraising round. I really suggest you go and find the grants, you find the loan, you go in to look at the loan. Do you want a personal loan? Do you want a business loan? What do you want to do with that? And I am very, I don't do that lightly. I never suggest people just go and get loans or put things on credit cards. That is not something that I am, an advocate in. However, there are people I work with who are at points of business where they do need extra cash flow or they need an extra cash to get something off the ground. But they only need it for like a certain period of time, and then the revenue that generates massively combats the risk in there. And so whenever I'm suggesting to someone potentially go and look at a business loan, it's always done on the basis of looking at the financial forecasting and looking and thinking, right, well, this realistically makes sense because of what the point of this money is. This is not what the conversation I'm having is not about you getting money to bail yourself out of something, or if your business is not making any profit or sales. That's not what this is about. This is about growth. It's about scaling. It's about when you're looking at how do we scale the business, sometimes part of the growth strategy is funding and is about how are you going to fund this. And so last year there was 2 or 3 businesses who I said, okay, yeah, they came to me and said, I think we need funding. And I said, okay, let's have a look. And I said, yeah, you do. And so then their to-dos and their job was to go and find some funding and go and apply for this loan or do this thing and that thing. And, it can really support people. I think having a business loan or having a personal loan has a real bad reputation. And obviously, rightfully so, we don't want to be encouraging people to get into debt and to get into loans. But what you have to remember is, and it depends when you're listening to this, right now is not really the greatest time in January of 2023 in terms of the economy. But at certain points and in certain cycles of an economy, it actually can be very cost effective and make a lot of sense to get a loan for your business or personally. Interest rate wise, in terms of logistics and T's and C's, like it can make a lot of sense. But again, I'm really reiterating with this, that this is my opinion. This is not me telling you what to do. Please do not go and take action from this podcast. Most of the time I'm like, go and take action from the podcast. This is not what this is about. This is me sharing with you an open conversation for you to kind of take in and kind of process. Please go and speak to a real professional in this area. So yeah, those are my thoughts with that. And just to basically to say that it's not necessarily that you're failing if you've scaled to a really decent amount and you're feeling like, oh no, we've got all this revenue, but there's still not enough cash to get to that next point, to get to the 1 mil or to get to the 3 mil or to get to the 10 mil. And it's like, feels like you need an additional cash injection. That is somewhat normal depending on your business. The other thing I wanted to touch on with this is about grants and other alternative sources of finance that you can get access to. So depending on where you live in the country or in the world, there are different things available. And there are different funds and there's lots of different things you can get. And I know in the UK, there's quite a few things depending on your business type, depending on your business model, depending on how old you are. There's lots of different bits, ifs and buts with these sort of things. I know in Ireland, they have had a really interesting grant scheme. And across Europe, there is for entrepreneurship. There's a lot of different stuff going on depending on where you are in the world. And I appreciate that. I think there's over 25 countries or something listen to this podcast. So I appreciate that I don't have the knowledge of your specific country, but the premise of the what I'm going to talk about is still valid. So definitely do your research and look at what you can get access to, especially if it's like your first business. They often can be, funding available, and you need to look for it. So often people come to me and they're like, I just can't find anything. It is annoying, it is frustrating, because it does often take a while to apply. It can be a really frustrating activity, and even finding them can be quite difficult. In terms of tips for finding grants, there are certain organizations that you can find related to your industry that will share them. So if you Google, just put your industry in and put grants and put a location geotag or something like that, it will help find. There's a lot of Facebook groups that you can find. There are, certain memberships you can even look at, but a lot of it is just you need to sit for an afternoon with Google and get really clever. Make sure you know how to use Google search really well and troll through a load of stuff. LinkedIn can be a good place to find grants, but also locally. There are often quite a lot of local things going on. So go onto your local business kind of page, look at what kind of organizations or, networking groups are around in your area, because they often share a lot of that sort of thing. But government websites are normally a good shout too. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of different things you can look at. I would say you've got to be, if you're looking for grants, you've just got to be on the ball and following a lot of different people. Sometimes some of the big community networks will partner with certain brands and companies. So things like Albright, if you're a woman, they, I think in the past, have had funding sources available. Also the banks, look at the banks. Sometimes the big banks have different options available, which is also good. But yeah, grants can be difficult to kind of find, but they can be worth it. And I've supported clients in applying for grants and getting grants, and people have, managed to get 5 grand, 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand's worth of grant, which makes a huge difference, right? And a huge impact to people's businesses. It is the one thing I do in relation to funding and investment and stuff. I can write and will do write grant applications. I'm rather good at it. I'm very good at it, and we have a high success rate of people getting that. But I do tend to only offer that as a service to businesses that I know and I'm kind of integrated with and understand their ins and outs, because it means I can write a much better application. So it's not a service that I really offer publicly. But make sure when you're writing your application for funding, or really for grants, but even for traditional funding, take the time, use the terminology they want, answer the questions you want, give a lot of detail, attach the stuff you need to attach. Don't just do a quick 5-minute thing, because they need detail and they want detail. And the more you can give them context on why they're giving you money, the much more likely you are to get it. And as I say, I've seen some real good successes from that, but it does take time, and or time or money, and you get someone else to write it for you. Anyway, that is the end of that episode. I think, just to round up, give away as little equity as possible, people. Don't give your equity away without really, really thinking about it. If you need to get funding or investment, that doesn't mean you've done something wrong. Sometimes, you just inevitably need it for the space and the place, the business you're in. The other thing I think is really important to remember is often when we need funding or investment, it's the funding and investment can speed up the scaling process. And so it's I will say to people, what am I saying? You can tell it's later in the day. I'm like, what am I trying to say? I'm saying right, well, in 3 years we can do that. But if you then get X amount of funding, you can probably do it in half the time or a third of the time. That ultimately is what happens. Funding and giving access to cash, which is essentially what we're talking about, allows you to, do more and hire more or be more or get more or experience more or learn more. That's what it is, right? So being really strategic about what are you using the money for? Is that going to help you? How is that enhancing the business? And how is it ensuring that the business is moving forward? Do not get funding and investment for something that's just going to keep it ticking over. I appreciate that for some industries and for some businesses, you're going to have to do that because something catastrophic's happened and you haven't really got a choice. Fine. But I wouldn't go and use investment and funding just as like, oh, we're just going to use this because like, why not? It's like, hang on a minute. Why are you getting it in the first place? How can you bootstrap? How can you look at other sources? Also, remember that you can use a combination of funding sources, which is really important. So there is no reason why you can't do a bit of personal loan or, you know, a bit of crowdfunding and, you know, a bit of a grant. And you can often mash things together, which in essence can sometimes be better because you're kind of layering the risk and you then can utilize it. And often your equity, you're not giving away as much equity or if any. But yeah, it's a difficult one. It's something you've got to kind of weigh up in your head and definitely feel into. I think for a lot of people, you get to a feel at this point. And then as a general rule of thumb, if you're starting a business, I really would avoid going into this situation if you can. As I've mentioned, some businesses, you are going to need investment or funding because there's no other way of doing it unless you personally have got 100 grand to put into it or 50 grand or 200 grand, which a lot of people don't have access to. I certainly wouldn't, to just chuck into a business and not know whether it's going to work or not. So yeah, you've got to try and weigh this up. But minimum viable product, really important. Bootstrapping, really important. Being scrappy, really important. And the benefit of not having funding, if you've got to the end of this episode and now you're like, do you know what? No, I don't need funding. And maybe you've bootstrapped and then you were wondering if you do. There is so much power in not having funding and just bootstrapping. And there's nothing stopping you at any point then getting support. And I really recommend this idea of like, getting to whatever point you get to, and then at the point in which you do need some money or investment, then moving on with that and doing it as needed. That is all for this week. I will speak to you next week. Take care and have a good day. Bye.